Okay, chat, we were talking a little bit before the stream technically began. So hello, Bat. Thank you for following. I'm gonna thank you again on a different video. But right now, I just want to get this off my chest while I'm still thinking about it. Then we'll go into more happy things to talk about, I promise. Let's talk about, I don't know, maybe for the next 20 or 30 minutes. He or she look welcoming. Magilu is quite a face for sure. But I will say, from the standpoint of what we're going to be doing next, I can pretty much definitively say that this will end up being the last video for Shadow Hearts. We did not beat the game. However, I think I'm going to make a judgment call to kill it early. I'm going to break down my logic for it, so that way you understand why I don't think I'll continue the game. I think the biggest issue with it so far is I really don't like any of the characters, chat. Like, if we were to rank these characters like an A to F grade, I think almost every character is an F grade. Like, Hilda, I don't like Hilda at all. She might even be an F minus. Like, I really don't like her as a character. Nathan is like maybe a D, maybe a C minus. I'm feeling kind of generous. Tanaya's like maybe a D. Johnny is like F minus minus minus. I really hate that character. I think for the most part, he really brings down the story for me because I just don't feel involved with him as a character. And there's some other people that are okay. Like Frank is maybe like F plus. He's just much worse Covenant characters. It just feels that way. I guess the only character that's okay, but not like he can't carry the game on his own as Roberto. Roberto, I think, is the only character that is like remotely likable for me. I don't like the rest of the cast. To talk about other negatives, I suppose, before we go into positives, because it's not a completely terrible game. I just want to make it super clear. Like when female characters are a D, don't think quite that way that you're stating. But I'm just gonna let you know, like, I just feel like the side quests are kind of rehashes of Covenant. I feel like in a lot of ways Covenant did almost everything this game is doing, but better. I think I was going to say I like the combat more in this game, and honestly, I don't even like the combat in this game. Like, I just feel so pressed to think about something positive in terms of like things they changed. Like, I originally liked the idea of the stock gauge. I like that they tried to do something different with like the elevation of attacks. But when you combine it, like if you don't look at it in isolation and you look at how it interacts with everything else in the game, I really fucking hate it, chat. I really hate it. I hate that every single side quest seems to want you to grind. I do not like grinding in video games. I do not like that in order to make spells not feel weak, you have to spend a lot of money. I don't like that I have very limited placement of who can get what. And I lost that freeform customization that was in Covenant, which was really good and definitely a step up from Shadow Hearts, so it just feels really disappointing. It feels like it's trying to force me to play really specific roles for different characters, so I can literally not play the game the way I want to play it because of the mechanics. Like, if you had taken all those characters and just put them in the Covenant subsystem, I literally have no problem playing the game, but I feel like the amount of memorization it wants you to do between like figuring out like what height of elements work in a combo, mixed with what stellar chart that goes good with, mixed with turn order being somewhat random due to speed and everything else. It just feels awful. It just feels really unfun to me. And it's like, you know, I can't even play like the elemental weakness system because I can't just focus on having like, instead of 4 mages, I'm forced, or instead of 2 mages, I'm forced to have 4. So all my elements are scattered all over the place. And it just feels really awkward that when I want to do like the double system or anything like that, that I am always forced to use magic. And I never did that in basically any of the other Shadow Heart games. In fact, like if you rewatch my playthrough of the first Shadow Hearts, I barely even used spells in that game. Like, I was so melee intensive, it was kind of crazy. Covenant allowed flexibility to have like a damage dealer that was a spellcaster, and I feel that was good. And I could focus on like a support mage, a black mage kind of thing, and then 2 melee characters, right? And even then, like, my mages would sometimes melee anyway, kind of things. Oh god, not this music. No, not the jazz. No, we'll talk about the jazz later. We're not there yet. I'm skipping ahead on that one, chat. But it just feels really tedious. I don't like, for example, they made the horrible idea to make it so that you have to kill an enemy to get coins in order to pay the actors, instead of it just being like a thief ability in Final Fantasy. What were they thinking? Honestly, what were they thinking? I don't want to waste my time collecting like 80, 90 coins through a playthrough and trying to figure out like what enemies drop what coins. I just don't want to do it, chat. And I feel like it ultimately comes back into payoff, right? So let's think about games I liked, didn't like, or feel were kind of neutral. And I feel like when you look at Shadow Hearts, you'll understand why I don't feel like it's something I want to continue into. You love it when I rip into a game? Well, you're probably going to love this topic, because I feel like this game is not the worst, right? We've played worse on stream, but I think something you have to think about is the entertainment factor. And this game doesn't have it. It is very bland. It plays a little too close, a little too by the book. Its villains, garbage. Actually, I will say they have some of the worst villains we've seen in any game. I mean, they literally called the killer character Killer and the lady villain Lady. Like, seriously? That feels like placeholder names. So it just feels really lazy. We have like the ridiculous wannabe penguin as like the third villain. And I do not give two shits about any of those characters, chat. I just don't care. I don't feel inspired by them. I don't feel like... I don't care about them as a threat. The story itself is horribly paced. We were like 14 hours in, chat, and most of it was not directed towards the main plot. It was all side quest stuff. And it felt really bad. It's worse than Eternia? That's a good question. I feel like Eternia was like really painful to play. This game is more tedious. Like, I feel Eternia was the much harder game comparatively, if I were to just look at it from that standpoint. I think the difference in why a game like Eternia, which might technically be worse, is that there are elements of it that are so ridiculously bad that it becomes entertaining, right? Like Zestiria, terrible game, absolutely terrible. That plot is such a train wreck. But I feel like it crosses the boundary of like, if you, it's kind of like an underflow in code. Like if you go so far below zero with the quality, it just loops around. It becomes the best. It becomes like really unintentionally funny. And that's like a way you can enjoy the game. So things like Eternia were like hilariously terrible with like the RNG dungeon. Like they were out of their minds. They were just straight up out of their minds. Will Shadow Hearts go to that level? No. And that's the problem. It's not bad enough to be funny, and it's not good enough to be entertaining. So, I mean, by its definition, it's at best mediocre. Honestly, I feel like it goes more towards the bad side. As I said before, I think they expect a really specific playstyle, and to me, it's just not entertaining. So even if I feel like I invest the time to clean up my combos, you know, start experimenting with spells in terms of like damage or cost down, it's like, what would the payoff be? I don't care about the plot. I don't really like the side quests. Most of them seem like kind of rehashy, kind of nonsense. It just kind of... Which was Peruti Sirens and New York Jazz. I feel like the Peruti Sirens is a worse song, therefore I have to say technically Peruti Sirens is worse. Like, that one was immediately funny how terrible it was. Like, within 30 seconds of it, it was apparent how bad it was. New York Jazz is just more bad because they didn't loop. It's just too short and it loops too much. So, like, I'm trying to think about other negative points. I want to just make sure I don't forget. Oh yeah, as I said before, so like the combat is like so dependent on the stock gauge. So I have to make a judgment call to basically build up stock gauge and just never use it before a boss battle. Or I have to just arbitrarily use it. And I will say that I really don't like the ambushes in this game. I feel they are way overtuned and completely unfair. Like, Shadow Hearts Covenant ambushes were kind of bad, and Shadow Hearts ambushes were also bad, but they are not as nonsense BS as these ambushes are. I legit have characters dying, and there's no counterplay. I die because I got ambushed. There's nothing I can equip differently. I already have the best armor in the game. I'm decently leveled. And I'm like shrugging my shoulders. What do you want me to do? I don't get to play the game and I lose the character? Like, arbitrarily? Like, who knows? Like, the strategy is literally to reset and save time. Like, that's how bad the ambushes are in this game. Like, in a Final Fantasy, if you get ambushed, it's more annoying. It's not usually game-ending unless you're playing, like, ultra low level. It's like an inconvenience. In this game, it is literally like, I can just straight up game over because I didn't go first. And that is one of the worst feelings in the world. For sure. Yeah, I don't like the bosses. I don't like how they're balanced. I thought Shadow Hearts at the beginning was really rough. For sure. But this one just feels like oppressively terrible. Like, honestly, it feels super, super unfun. And I think what makes me more upset, definitely in retrospect, is knowing that if I had managed to kill those bosses in a quick amount of time, I would actually have gotten items to make the game less grindy. But, like, I can't do that on a blind playthrough because I don't know what the bosses can do. And or I have to set up all the stock gauge and not get injured. And or I just have to sit there and spend, like, hours trying to figure out what should combo into what happens if I'm at 80% stock or 90% stock or max stock, and think about every single scenario in every boss fight, or I just don't play the game. And I'm just gonna let you know, chat, it's just much easier to just not play the game. Because I'm like, I don't feel like investing that kind of time into like a, as I said, like, okay game. It's just, yeah, if you know with the bwop bwop bwop, for sure. I really don't like how they sexualize Shania. That for sure already put me off in like a not good note, for sure. That honestly made me really uncomfortable. And I don't really appreciate what they did with the character. I don't mind it being like quote-unquote more sensual with some of the stuff, but it was like really flagrant with some of the cutscenes. And I'm like, seriously? I think like even chat was joking where she just could not keep her clothes on. Like, it was so bad. I'm just like, come on, listen. They can wear like questionable outfits and it's whatever, but it's like she's literally stripping in some of the cutscenes. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Stop that. Oh, it's like, remember when it used to be about demons, chat? Remember that in Shadow Hearts? Like, oh, okay, Shania. I don't know, chat. It's just weird. Very off-putting for me, for sure. Yeah, what little clothes she already had. I know, chat. She's already wearing not much. So it's like, really? I don't know, chat. It's just weird. I'm not interested in that kind of stuff, especially not in games. I'm like, listen, I'm coming here for the entertainment factor, for sure, and I am not amused. Let me think, are there any other negatives I forgot to kind of state before I go into positives? Because it's not completely trashing the game, as much as I am definitely stating this game is really heavily flawed. Yeah, I already touched upon, I really don't like the magic system in this game. I hate it. I hate it with a passion. Hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it. Terrible.
You're wide open!
For sure. Thank you, Intoxicating Gross, for following as we talk about why we're not going to play Shadow Hearts anymore. I promise you we're almost done with this little mini tangent for sure. But yeah, it just doesn't work. Oh, Intoxicating Gross says, I hate this game, went so heavily into the campy stuff. Exactly. I don't find the slapstick humor funny. I think Chris is also kind of stating it. And just like the way it transitions between cutscenes is some of the worst I've ever seen in a video game. I have never been so off-put watching a cutscene before, like in this game. Like literally, we go from like, we're in the prison, we see Edna, we're like, wow, you're here. Then we kill a giant demon, and we just go back to New York, and we don't say anything. We don't do anything. It just awkwardly goes to world map. It doesn't state whether she's alive or dead, and I'm like, what is my takeaway supposed to be for that? Yeah, the cutscene transitions in this game are garbage, and that took me out of the story. Like, what little I cared with the very one-note characters, it got even worse, because I'm like, I don't even know what is happening, and I'm trying my best to pay attention to commentate on it. Yeah, it went like 2 hours before the game clarified. I'm like, are we just not going to talk about it? No, we're just doing something else? Nope, we're not going to talk to Ricardo about it? Nope, we're not going to talk to Mal about it? Nope. And then later on, they're like, Ricardo's like, I'll get revenge for Edna. And I'm like, but you could have just said she was alive. Why is this even happening? We knew this. We saw her. Hello? Duh. And then later he's like, wow, she's alive? And then later on, he's like, you kill Edna or something. In like the same cutscene in the hotel. I'm like, did it forget the plot? I forgot the plot. Worst thing is the drama can be used incredibly well and they squandered even that. It really could have, and it just came off super flat. It's so brutal. So I was just very frustrated. As I felt like the game was like really padding it out. Like the dungeons were not the worst. We'll start with the sort of compliment. The dungeons in Covenant were kind of bad at points for sure. I feel like some of the dungeons in Covenant were much worse than what we experienced in the New World. But I think what kind of compounds it is that like, I'm not really interested in getting a cutscene as my reward for beating the dungeon. I'm just like, well, why the hell did we do that? Almost every turn of the dungeon. They're like, wow, oh, if only we could get to the other side of the sunken ship. And I'm like, guys, you literally have somebody that can fly. You have somebody else that's so strong, they could just chuck you across. You have characters that have such good jumping skills, they could just get to the other side. Like, none of the stage hazards made any sense given our party. It made no sense. So even in universe, it was very off-putting. The encounter rate dragged the dungeons down. I think that goes into what my complaint is with the combat. So one thing that was like an unintended side effect of making the combat more complicated is it made the combat take so much damn longer. Like, compare how long an average fight in this game was compared to Shadow Hearts 1 or Covenant. Like, I was done with the fight in like 20 seconds or less every time in the other games. This one, I'm like messing around with menus and trying to look to see if I should double. And then I'm like, oh, that doesn't quite combo, or oh, this person's a different height, so I gotta retarget. And it just takes like 5 to 6 minutes sometimes on like what should be easy, dumb encounters. And there's like no way to speed it up due to how the system works. Like, I could just auto attack, but then it's like, oh, these enemies are built with the idea that you combo, so their health totals are just so astronomically high compared to Shadow Hearts. Like, why was I fighting characters with like 500 health when I can only do 80 damage? And like 3 of them in one combat. I'm like, what the hell is going on? I'm at max weapons, max armor. I can't even do like a quarter of their health. Are you serious? You do that in Shadow Hearts and Covenant, you're gonna one-shot them, fight over. It just like slap them, they're done. And so like, it just made it drag, as you said before. Like, again, it's like if you look at everything in a vacuum, some of the pieces really work. The problem is like, if you put them into the whole system, it just feels so tedious and drawn out. And it is such a shame, because they could have done so much better. Try says, give me a big sword and a ball set, and Green saying the magic's all the best things for sure. Yeah, it's just so stupid. Like, honestly, the dungeon stuff is like, the puzzles in the game were like what you would expect in a very generic JRPG, and not what you would expect to see in a Shadow Hearts game. Like, Shadow Hearts game had puzzles, it made you interact with it in some ways, but for the most part, what you were doing was believable for the characters. Like, I'm looking to unlock a gate, so I'm looking around for switches, or like, I need a key in order to get through a door, and I'm looking for the key, right? Those kind of things work in the universe. It's not some stupid stuff like, I for some reason can't reach something like 10 feet away from me. In a world where literally a character has wings. And they're shown in the in-game cutscenes flying into the building. I'm like, I don't know, chat. Bad game. So yeah, it's not, again, I don't even think it's the encounter rate. The encounter rate actually wasn't terrible. It's just the length of the battles were just so much longer. I would say it's safe to say my shortest battle was like 2.5 minutes. And that's like completely unacceptable. That is completely unacceptable to me, chat. That is way too long in combat. And I feel like that's the thing too. You have to talk about like the draws of the game. So we're gonna touch upon that one more time before I talk about something more positive. So like, the big thing is like, in Shadow Hearts and Covenant and Koldeka, the combat itself is not why I played the game. It just had to be serviceable. It had to be something I could pick up, and it had to be something that I could clear quickly so I can get to the parts I actually like. Like in Koldeka, it's for the character back and forths. I love how much the party members clash with each other. And I found that very entertaining. And it was like perfect for that kind of pace of game. In Shadow Hearts 1, I started to care more about the characters, like in terms of what their goals are, and I was intrigued about the plot, and I wasn't sure what the game would do next, because it's a dark game, so it could kind of go either way. Covenant, the plot itself was okay, but I had a lot of fun with the side quests. They were so wacky. Like, I'm like, you know, we'll clear the dungeon, whatever, but now I'm gonna see the next wolf bout, or now I get to get a new form, and I'm like, wow, I really like it because I feel really powerful after I you know, play around the side quests and actually do what the game wants me to do. And in this game, it's like, yeah, go fight somebody. I guess I'll power you up. Does it do noticeable more damage? No. Is the cutscene leading into an entertaining? No. Do you have a reason to use this character over any of the other characters? No. Yeah, it's just like, it's such a big downgrade. And don't get me wrong, I think Covenant made a lot of missteps, and I feel like that stopped it from being like an amazing game in my eyes. Like, it's good, but there were a lot of flaws with it. There was a lot of sections of the game they should have trimmed. I feel like it was awkward, where we were kind of put in control of certain characters and not really given any guidance. AKA, every time we went somewhere in From the New World and it refused to advance the damn plot. Looking at you, Roswell. Remember that, chat? Remember me just going like, I guess I have to get these idiots to the base somehow. Someone will trigger this conversation, I guess. I don't know why we're going in here, other than like, I know from a player standpoint that these are characters from other Shadowheart games, but I don't get what my character motives are, and I don't get what it is that they want us to do. Oh yeah, no, I am fully agreeing with you. Covenant has some really bad dungeon design for sure, and I feel like some of the puzzles suffered because they did not really think about it in context of like encounter rates and things like that. And I fully agree with you. But I feel like this game, it failed even just like basic dungeons. It just dragged on because the combat, the cutscenes were very lackluster. It's like repeating everything we saw in Covenant, but worse. And this was like their opportunity to shine. Yeah, remember that it took me like 30 minutes, not 30, it took me like 20 solid minutes of just trying to get the plot to advance, where I'm like, what idiot did I not talk to get these idiots into their idiot base? Just like, I'm like, I know what it wants me to do, I just can't trigger this cutscene. Who do I have to re-talk to after I already talked to everybody first before going to the base? I gotta do it all again. And I think that kind of rounds it up with one big word, tedium. I feel like this game's plot advancement was tedious. I feel like the combat, because it was so bloated, was tedious. I felt like the ability to upgrade the characters being dependent on money or constant battles was tedious. I just feel like that is just the best way to describe the game. It's not terrible. We have played worse on stream. But like, you have to say to yourself, when we've played games that just either didn't let me play or I gave up for different reasons, like, they were more entertaining. Like, I had a terrible time with Castlevania 64. That game is genuinely bad. But like, I had amusement with it because of how horrible it was. Like, the expectation of what it wanted you to do with what it gave you was just like horribly terrible, but somewhat funny to a point. Like, there's still a breaking point with it where it's not even entertaining from that standpoint. Then you have games like Rogue Galaxy, where the plot is a mess towards the last quarter of the game, but it has so many memorable moments that are just, they're not good. They're not good moments in the game, but they become memorable, and chat can meme on them forever, like Suddenly Centaur, or getting one shot by the final boss by an unblockable attack. Or your BS from, what is it, East 3 with the 50-50 spike pit of death. Like, there's so many moments in there where you're like, that is actually BS, and it's amazing that that made it into the game. Compassion. Yeah, Compassion's another good meme from that game for sure. And I feel like this game will never be good enough to meme on, and it won't be bad enough to make fun of and go through of why the game doesn't work. Because I feel like this talk here summarizes everything the game has done wrong, essentially, and there's basically nothing it could do to make a comeback. Like, even if it gives me the ability to strike every enemy in combat with something, even if it gives me more power, because my characters feel horribly weak compared to Covenant in particular. Covenant was probably the easiest in the series, to be fair, but I felt horribly weak, even though I had the best equipment, and it just felt so horrible to slog through. I just don't feel like it'll have one of those moments. Like, the closest it'll have is, like, the jazz music, I guess. I don't know, chat. So we'll briefly talk about the positives. I don't have a lot of positive things to say. Music, solid. I think for the most part it was good for what it was. I do like the intro theme. I would probably listen to that outside of the game. Wow, I'm really struggling, chat. Think about this. What else did I like about the game? I guess the actual look of the cities was interesting. I'll give them that. I didn't like how it was really ambiguous what would make you leave the map or not. But I liked how it looked for the most part, at least up to the point that we had played. I'm really struggling, chat. I mean, I didn't like the math game. I think everybody knows. I don't like puzzles, so to have a math game like that was horrible. It was actually atrocious. I'm not talking about the simple multiplication stuff. I'm talking about you have to fill out A and B on the treasure chest in order to open it. Oh my gosh, that took forever, chat. What else could I say is positive? I guess the transformation forms were better than the early ones in Covenant. I mean, it's kind of a stretch, but at least she looked more different between them than the ones in Covenant, because those were definitely very lackluster in Covenant. Yeah, other than that, I'm just really struggling, because as I said before, I don't like the goofiness of the characters. Oh, speaking of which, I really did not like Roger Bacon's voice. Sorry, chat, I blanked on that. I wanted to bring it up. What a terrible voice actor to replace any of the previous ones. 0 out of 10 voice acting. Terrible. I like the monster design, actually, now that I think about it. I think it might be stronger than Covenant's. I actually do think the monster designs were better. I think they were more varied, and I think the boss designs themselves were interesting to look at. I don't think they were fun to fight, but I think they were very interesting comparatively. Chad, I think I'm out of things to talk about. I can't think of anything else that's positive. Yeah, it's like... I mean, it wasn't completely terrible in the first hour or so. No, I lied. Actually, I really hated the intro of the game. Never mind. I'm a liar. Ignore me. I remember the opening cutscene now. That set the mood for, I don't think I'm gonna like this game, and I don't think it really ever changed. So, I think with that, chat, I have nothing else to say about the game. So let's wrap it up. So we'll be saying goodbye to YouTube in a minute. We're listening to the Shadow Heart from the New World soundtrack. As I said before, probably one of the few positive points, so shout outs to the composer, I guess. Yeah, it just, I don't know. I do like my games darker, and this was too goofy. Now, granted, I'm okay with goofy, but knowing where this came from, I think hurt, because I knew this game could have been so much more. And so I think it's safe to say this game isn't the worst we played, but it was probably one of the biggest disappointments. I think that's pretty easy to state. I think that's a pretty safe statement, chat. So let's say goodbye to YouTube, chat. We're gonna go ahead and enjoy another game. I do not think I will come back to this game. I have no curiosity about the plot. I don't like the combat. I don't like the grind. I don't really want to trudge through the dungeons. I hate that Johnny's supposed to be a detective, but he's a complete and total idiot, and everybody seems to be a better detective than he is. I don't like that he has a detective agency, and he feels like a rich snobby kid, who I really freaking hate, chat. I don't know why they decided to make him the protagonist. He's so annoying. He's so annoying, chat. I hate him. F-, character. Terrible. Terrible. He's nothing redeeming in the first 13 hours of playing. I don't think I could get through it. But I think with that, we're going to say goodbye to Johnny Lame Hero. And we're going to be saying hello to... I think his name is Benjamin by default. I had to think about that, chat. I have not played this game, Mystic Quest, in like 20-something years, but I think it's Benjamin. So anyway, chat, we're gonna say goodbye, and sorry that Shadow Hearts ended kind of more on a sour note, but I think you as the chat deserve to watch something more entertaining, or at least something more pleasurable to listen to or watch.